welcome to the 8th episode of A Girl in Love with Tech podcast. My name is Rachel Irabor. I'm a Microsoft Power Platform advocate, a Microsoft Power Platform developer, and also a Microsoft Learn student ambassador. So this podcast is actually available on Spotify, Google Podcast, and also on YouTube. And also, not to forget, it's also available on Anchor Podcast. So don't forget to subscribe, follow us everywhere. So follow us everywhere. And our guest for today is actually our guest
Aaron
for today
Gums.
is actually Aaron Gums, who is absolutely amazing. This is the first time we are meeting, like talking visually online. Most times we talk on Twitter, on tweets, and also on LinkedIn too. So we have invited him here today to talk about his journey into Power Platform, the community, and also to give a general overview about Microsoft Dataverse. Hi, Aaron Gomes.
Hi, Rachel. Really good to see you. And talk
Yeah,
to you live instead of just over tweets and LinkedIn. Really, really good.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. So I want to ask, please, if you can introduce yourself so that we can know more about you.
Sure thing. So I'm Aaron Gums, and I'm
Yeah,
the head of Power Platform at a company called Changing Social at
yeah,
the moment.
amazing.
So Changing Social, we are a digital transformation and a change management organization,
Okay.
and we don't just do the technical side of things. So although
Yeah,
we do develop Power Platform solutions directly to clients and also to complement all of the services that we have internally, we
yeah.
also do a lot of change management focused activities and also training to other organizations as well across the whole Microsoft 365 stack.
Well, that's really amazing. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's
I
really interesting.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. I'm so like every time I hear stuff about Power Platform, Microsoft 365, I'm always amazed. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
amazing. So I wanted
good.
to ask you, like, how did you get to know about Power Platform? Was it during your current job or you had an experience before on Power Platform?
So this is quite interesting because I almost fell into Dynamics CRM by mistake
Yeah.
almost 11 years ago now. So it was quite a long time. I started as a graduate and I went
Yeah,
to a relatively small company that were doing custom development at the time.
yeah.
And they had a client who so happened to need dynamic CRM, and they were
Okay.
focusing their solution on customer support and cases at the time. Now, when I joined that company, I didn't know that I was going to be doing dynamic CRM. So
Yeah.
I kind of stumbled upon it. And my first project was Dynamics CRM 2011 on premise. So thinking about
Um,
servers as well as the configuration. And I've just kind of stuck with it all the way through. Um,
yeah.
had the pleasure of also working with what was called ADX Studios on that project at the time as well, which
Yeah.
has now become Power Pages all these years later.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just something that's always given variety and something I've always wanted to stick with, which is quite nice.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I did not know that Power Pages actually had a name before Power Portals.
Yes, absolutely. So it was actually owned by a third party company initially, when we
Okay.
had the products like Dynamics CRM 2011 and
Yeah.
eventually started to go online. And then Microsoft acquired the company and
Okay.
they
Wow.
developed their first version of the product based on that code.
Yeah.
That code at the time was very much on premise and perpetual licenses and things like that. And eventually it evolved into what we now call Power Pages with a
Yeah.
subscription model, fully cloud. People don't need to worry about the fact that you've got web servers behind the scenes and all
Yeah,
that
that's
kind of
true.
stuff, which is quite nice. So yeah, there's a long history there behind what we now call Power Apps and Power Automate and Power
Yes.
Pages and everything else that comes into the Power Platform as well.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's really nice. And also, Microsoft Dynamics CRM is actually a very good way to come into Power Platform because most persons have seen in the community, most of them they came into either through Dynamics or through SharePoint.
Yes, exactly
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
and what's really nice about having the experience of Dynamics CRM prior to it
Yeah.
being a cloud product is that you got to see the back end of the product. So you got to understand how the SQL database works. And although you're not necessarily directly touching those components, you get to see the actual inner workings of all of the tables and how system jobs are queued up and all that kind of stuff as well. So yeah, it's really valuable to have that knowledge and experience now that everything's on the cloud and everything's become a little bit more abstract, I think.
Yeah, that's actually very nice. It's actually very nice. And there's also one thing too, like we are going to be discussing about the community. What do you think about the Power Platform community? Because the Power Platform community, I think, is the best community I have come in contact with, especially in tech.
Yeah.
They are so lovable, so welcoming. Like, it's amazing. Every time I speak to anybody in the community, like now we are speaking, we are talking.
Exactly.
We actually met in the community. Yeah. So what do you think about the Power Platform community?
Exactly the same. Absolutely love it. So
yeah,
I would say I've probably learned more about Dynamics and the Power Platform through the community than I have through the official learning resources themselves. Often when I need to find information, it's either about latest releases and product information, or it's about an issue that I'm having on a project today. And all of those pieces of information come through the community first. You'll often see a Microsoft announcement at the same sort of time, but it's the context of how that could be applied moving forward, which is really helpful. And I love the fact that you can just go to, the official Microsoft forums or LinkedIn or Twitter or anywhere else, ask a question, and it's almost guaranteed that someone's going to come back to you.
Yeah. And definitely use the hashtag Power Platform or use Power Addicts, and you're going to get a lot of answers. Yeah. It's amazing.
That. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. There's also one thing I want to point out is that when coming to Microsoft Power Platform, like a lot of people are confused. When they finish the first step, they're like, okay, what's the next thing to do? Like, what's the next thing to learn? Especially when they are not using Power Platform in their current role, or they are looking for a job in Microsoft Power Platform. I noticed recently that Microsoft Dataverse is actually amazing. It's something that we actually need to understand. We need to know. You get to learn about tables. You get to learn about relationships, entity diagram. It's Microsoft Dataverse is so big.
It is. It really is, isn't it?
Microsoft Dataverse is so big and there's so much to learn. So if you can actually give us like a brief overview about Microsoft Dataverse and how do you think about the utilization of Microsoft Dataverse?
Absolutely. So Dataverse is, as Microsoft would frame it, it's the database-like service that is provided within the Power Platform. And the reason why it's called database-like as opposed to database is because you get all of those added features, some of them that you've just mentioned there and saying it's so big. You have the ability to configure views, forms, charts, dashboards, security elements around that as well. It's not just tables with columns and data in those columns either. So no, I think it's a fantastic offering. And I know that sometimes people can get put off by the cost of the product because there are things like SharePoint that are just already included in your licensing. And it can be far easier to start with a template and start with SharePoint. However, I think when you look at the vast kind of scale of Dataverse and the fact that the cost of the license doesn't increase with the kind of additional features that you're using over time. So the benefit of that one license cost becomes more valuable over time as you start to use it more frequently. And it's definitely worth considering, even if it does seem like a little bit of an overhead initially.
Yeah, that's true. And there's also one thing too. When I was trying to get into Microsoft Power Platform, I think I have to figure out a lot of things, which was actually the community that helped me to be able to move forward in my learning. But there's also one thing that people actually they leave out when we talk about tables. We have standard tables, custom tables, and also managed tables. Instead of using a standard table, they just move ahead and create a new table. Or maybe there are so many instances that, like, let me say, for example, you want to call in a user, you want to just use an easy formula in Canvas app and calling a user. You can easily use a user standard table
Yep.
in Power Platform. Or maybe you are working on the accounts, you're working on information about an information about a customer. There's actually a table in Microsoft Dataverse that can actually relate to the data you need. So standard tables are very, very essential to use. Those minor things, creating of relationships, where you get to create relationships between table, one-to-many relationship, many-to-many relationship. And a lot of people are like, okay, what's the reason of creating a relationship between tables? So what do you think about that?
It's a very good point, and I guess how long have we got? Because
Yeah.
the construct of tables in Dataverse is so interesting. So you could look at it from the perspective of the offering of the product from Microsoft. So
Yes.
let's say, for example, you have Dynamics 365 customer service or Dynamics 365 sales.
Yeah.
Now that will have a set of tables that specifically fulfill like an operational purpose. And
Yes.
sometimes those tables are hidden behind a particular license because it's a part of a
Yeah.
bigger product. But equally, because some of those tables may be within like an add-on when you're installing solutions into
Yeah.
Dataverse,
Yeah.
people don't necessarily know that they're there or available either, which
Yes,
is quite
that's true.
interesting.
Yeah.
So my first point of call would be, does the table already exist as a standard table?
Yeah.
And there's ways for us to kind of find out exactly which tables are available across the whole of the common
Yeah.
data model in GitHub. And then if it's a part of a premium product, let's look at the functionality that that product is going to give. So for
Yes.
example, if you're building a ticketing type system
Okay.
and you need SLAs and things like that and queue management and workload, it's
Yeah.
probably going to cost more to rebuild that yourself, and you're probably not going to be able to do it in such a complete way or high quality way that
Yeah.
Microsoft have already done it. So again, talking about cost and some people not necessarily thinking it's great because it's an additional cost. If you
Yes.
think of it as, if I'm paying extra for this Dynamics license, I get SLAs included with very little code that I need to write, if any at all, and I can use
Yeah.
Power Automate. I've got workload management sitting there for me. I've got integration with Outlook sitting there for me as well, and all these wonderful
Yes.
things. Um, you know, it's really interesting to see what kind of data models people might build if they thought they had to build it from scratch compared to
Yeah.
what's actually already
What you
available
have
there,
already. Yeah.
and where you might need to install additional solutions. So that's one angle, I would say.
Yes. Yeah,
um,
true.
the other angle I would say is about solutions themselves.
Yeah.
So when we're building solutions, we want to try and reduce the number of dependencies that we've got between one solution and another. And one way we do that is by only including the components that we actually need
Yeah.
for that customization, as opposed to including everything.
Yeah.
That's not always been the case with Dynamics, which is really interesting. But it's such a useful feature to be able to use thinner solutions as such when we are building our solutions in Dataverse. And I guess what's really interesting is you just need to make sure that you click the existing tab as opposed
Yeah.
to the new tab straight away. Just search for the keyword for what you might be looking for, whether that's a choice, whether it's a
Yeah.
table, whether it's a field in a table,
Yeah.
and just see if something similar already exists, because you can guarantee that for most of the common scenarios, there's probably something that you can potentially reuse.
Yes, that's true. And you also mentioned choice just now.
Yep,
Like for option sets or choice as we normally know it,
yep,
you get to reuse it, especially when when it's global. You can use it for
yes,
several
exactly.
applications. So you don't have to actually create you don't have to create it so many times. Maybe for now, let me say for instance, you need like a drop down, a
Yes,
choice that you are going to use for this particular application. And maybe next time you think that, okay, I also need to create this particular choice again for another table. Instead of creating a new one, you can easily just use the existing choice column you already
exactly.
have. Yeah.
Yeah.
And sorry.
No, it's okay. I was going to say there's also another angle to this as well, which
Yeah.
is, should I use a choice or should I create a custom table? Which to
Yeah.
some people that may sound a little bit far-fetched or a little bit
Yeah.
peculiar, but if you take an example of a list of countries, for
Yeah.
example. Now, choice would be your first guess because you're
Yes.
thinking
Yeah.
drop down. I need to be
Yeah.
able to select a predefined list. But
Yeah.
then you might be thinking, actually, if I need to rename a country because something's happened in the world, or we
Yeah.
don't have a full list of countries to begin with, and we
Yeah.
need people to add more in the future,
Yes.
do we really want them to have to come back to the
Yeah.
person configuring the solution and then deploy that to production? Or
Yeah.
is there a way that
True.
we can get them to edit it themselves?
Yes.
So if you were to create a table called country
Yeah.
instead, then actually your country list, which still appears similar to a drop down, especially
Yes.
in Canvas apps,
Yeah.
that becomes data. And then
Yeah.
they just add a new record with the country name as opposed to having to configure the software.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are
Is
many
that
good reasons to use choices.
yeah, to wait, sorry, Aaron, I want to ask,
Yeah,
in order to understand, to break it down a bit, when you say a table, do you mean where you have a column, which is also known as our attributes, and you have rows, like you have the countries listed as a row? That is what you mean,
so,
right?
yes, exactly, and very good point because I'm a
Yeah.
bit of a dinosaur and I use the old terminology sometimes. So yeah, you're absolutely right. In that scenario, you might consider having a table called country. Your
Yeah.
column would be country name, and then the row would be per country.
Yeah.
And the end user could populate as many of those as they wanted to.
Yeah.
Whereas with a choice, it's just one
Yes.
field, it's one drop down, and you
Yeah.
have to deploy any changes that you might have.
Yes, thank you. And I also want to make a point in what you just said, which is so important. Like, I got to actually know of this recently, what you just
Yep.
explained. That is why I wanted to actually want you to break it down, especially for those. Maybe this is the first time. This is the
Yes.
first time that you're hearing about it. You can actually use this to create a relationship. Like when you already have your country table, then you can create a relationship to maybe your user table, and that
Yes.
becomes a lookup column, and it's
Exactly that.
perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And using the example of countries, that's
Yeah.
one of the ones I'm always battling with because if you look at the standard account and user and contact tables, they will
Yes.
have a free text field called country. But
Yeah.
one of the most common requests I've had in the past is, can we make this a predefined list? And you end up
Yeah.
swapping out that field for a country table, which ultimately presents itself as a lookup in that
Yeah.
scenario. Yeah.
Yes, it's actually perfect. Like there are so many things to learn about Microsoft Dataverse, Microsoft Dynamics, Microsoft Power
Yeah.
Platform. You just have to take it step by step, and you have the community. Like there are so many people who are posting blogs,
Yeah.
posting articles, they're posting videos every day, taking their time. And also you have a blog.
I do.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
seen your blogs. It's mostly on Dataverse. Like you're a
Yes.
guru on Dataverse.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's actually amazing. So if you're thinking about your journey and you are thinking, okay, I just got into Microsoft Power Platform or I just got into Microsoft Dynamics and I'm thinking, okay, what is the next step? I have learned what is Microsoft Power Platform. I have learned what is Dynamics. I've learned the apps in Dynamics CRM
Yep.
or Dynamics Power Platform. So what is the next thing to learn? You have the community there for you. You have the Microsoft Learn and also different YouTube channels you can watch to learn and also build projects, which is very, very essential. When you are reading, watching videos, and you are not building, it's going to be very, very hard to
Exactly.
understand what you are actually learning. Yeah.
Yeah, completely agree. When I look back and think about the different methods I've used for learning, whether that's the certifications and I'm revising
Yes.
for an exam, whether it's just general, when I was a graduate and kind of
Yeah.
stumbled into Dynamics CRM at the time,
Yeah.
or whether it's today at Power Platform, there's nothing better than actually just building and using
Yes.
we all have access to developer environments. We can all sign up
Yeah.
to trials. Just get building and apply the knowledge. It's probably the best way of learning,
Yeah. It's
um,
perfect.
especially with how fast the platform moves as well.
Yeah, it's so amazing. Like you can log into Power Apps right now. You can
Mm,
log into the Power Apps environment right now, and you're going to see something new. You're going
yeah,
to see, like, you're going to just see something at the beginning of the canvas. You're going to see something. Okay, this I've not seen this before.
exactly that. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think what's really important as well is making sure that you can acknowledge that you're not ever going to know everything. If you
Yeah.
think, early in my career, and I've mentored a few people as well, being a manager
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff, and you know naivety is almost a good thing in this scenario, because when you
Yeah.
start your journey, you think, right, I need to learn, say, Dataverse, and
Yes.
you start on this kind of step-by-step journey to understand the
Yeah.
product, and you think you've learned as much as you can.
Yeah.
And then there's a product update, and then there's a release wave, and then you
Yeah.
speak to a senior consultant that you're working with on the project, and then they have different ideas as well. And
Yeah.
it's almost like, as you become more senior, you get to learn how vast the product actually is, because
Yes. That's
of the
true.
kind of architecture that you're designing at the time.
Yeah.
And I think for that to not overwhelm you as an individual, and to make sure you don't have too much imposter syndrome, because I think everyone in the Power Platform has some to a degree,
Yeah. True.
you need to kind of accept that you won't know everything. And
Yeah.
dare I say it, you almost have to ask, how hard can it be? All of the collateral is out there, all of the knowledge
Yeah.
is out there. So yeah, it's a
Yeah.
really interesting journey, especially as you start to learn more and more about it.
Yeah, that's what you just said everything right now. I've seen a lot of questions where people ask me, like, especially on Microsoft Power Platform. Maybe you just got to know about Microsoft Power Platform and they are starting their journey. They're like, should I learn everything?
Yeah, it's just not possible, is it?
Yeah,
Unfortunately.
they're like, should I
Yeah.
learn the
Mm,
five apps in? Should I learn the five applications in
yeah.
Power Platform? I'm like, wow, that's not possible.
Yeah,
Even in Power
exactly.
Apps, most people they know about they are gurus on modern driven apps,
Mm,
but they have little knowledge on Canvas app.
yeah.
You understand? So it's not possible learning everything. You can't say you want to learn Power BI, Power Pages, like understand it from the beginning to the end. It's
Yeah.
not, just have to take it easy on yourself. Think about, okay, which of this particular tool do I
Mm,
need? Like, which of these two do I need to work with? Or do I have an interest in? Maybe, for instance, you're looking for a job, you don't know the next step. You can think, for me, I started with Power Apps.
yeah.
And when I was working with Power Apps, I noticed that most times I needed Power Automate.
Yes, exactly. Exactly that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had
You're
to learn
always
Power
going to
Automate too.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're always going to bump into another part of the Power Platform when you're building a particular
Yeah.
component, which is quite interesting. But
Yeah.
one thing I'd like to add as well is that I think that if you can strive to take the PL900 and
Yes.
the MB910, so Power Platform Fundamentals and
Mhm.
Dynamics CRM Fundamentals, so
Yeah.
pretty much everything that can sit on Dataverse,
Yeah.
that will give you a good way to identify like the trigger points or the keywords for each of the products. So,
Yes.
you know, if you hear something like resource scheduling, you're automatically going to think Dynamics 365
Yes.
field service.
Yes.
You know, if you think about visualization, then you're always
Yeah.
going to be thinking about Power BI,
Power
you know.
BI.
So
Yeah.
if you can get to that level where you understand the concept of each product, and
Yeah.
for example, you know, in Power Automate there are triggers via connectors, but
Yes.
there's no way you could possibly learn the 900 or 1000 connectors that there are out
Yeah.
there
True.
today.
Yeah.
So
True.
I always think that's a good way of learning, and that's what I recommend to my team. It's, let's
Yes.
get the fundamentals so that we understand those trigger words, and
Yeah.
then we'll specialize in different products between ourselves over time.
Yeah. That's true, especially learning about the fundamentals.
Mm,
Like, apart from even Microsoft Power Platform or Dynamics, no matter what technical skills
yeah.
you are trying to learn, you have to know about the fundamentals.
Exactly. Exactly.
So,
And
yeah.
I guess on top of that as well is the other skill that we absolutely need to make
Yeah.
sure that we have is almost like your database 101. So
Yes.
kind of
True.
understanding how
Yeah.
objects work and how they relate to each other, and
Yes.
how, you know, you may have what seems like a massive database, but actually
Yeah.
you'll have different versions of that vision depending on what you're trying to achieve and what component that you're building. So yeah,
Yes.
database 101 as well as your kind of fundamentals on Power Platform
Yeah.
and Dynamics CRM always works well.
Yeah, and there are actually a lot of courses on databases. I think recently I took a course on database on
Yep,
LinkedIn,
gotcha.
database fundamentals, because it's actually very essential. You
Yeah,
have to know about these things. You have to learn about entity diagram relationships. You have to know, most times they might just think that, okay, since I'm into Power Platform, I don't need to know about
yeah.
databases. I
Mhm.
don't have to know anything about databases, does not concern me, but it actually concerns you.
It really does, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, if you're building on, you know, let's say for example, you've got a Power Automate that's triggered via an Excel spreadsheet, or you've
Yeah.
got a Power App that's working off a SharePoint list,
Yes.
you're not necessarily going to bump into too many database fundamentals, but
Yeah.
if you want to work on Dataverse, you absolutely need to understand how objects work and
Yeah.
relationships and
Yeah.
everything like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true. That's perfect. And it's amazing talking with you, especially on Microsoft Dataverse.
thank
There's so
you.
much to learn on it, but it's actually amazing. And it's great, especially when working with it on Microsoft Power Platform. You get
Yes.
to work with, when you're building an application, you get to work with business rules, get to work with workflows.
Yeah.
There are so many things you can do with Microsoft Dataverse. So what advice do you give to someone, maybe someone who's trying to change their career into Dynamics or Microsoft Power Platform, or actually someone who is starting their journey in Power Platform?
Very good question. So
Yeah.
I would say again, like we were saying with learning,
Yeah.
just set up your developer trial and your developer plan, or just your trial environment,
Yes.
and just get building. And I guess what's really interesting is you've obviously got the enterprise side of the world where you'll always have large organizations that just need to implement a really large system, but there's also a lot of value in, how can I improve my day-to-day efficiency by 10 minutes here, an hour there, etc., etc. And a lot of the things that you can gain from your developer environment is those smaller use cases for you as an individual and potentially your department as well.
Yes.
So I'd say just set up your trial, have a little play with the components and see what you feel most comfortable with, whether it's websites, whether it's chatbots, automation, whether it's
Apps.
apps, and everything else that comes in the Power Platform. I'm sure I forgot one there.
Yeah. Flows.
Uh, it, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
And, is there something you can do for yourself? So the example I always use is
Yes.
I have a shared calendar with my family.
Okay.
I also have my work calendar. And because of my nature of my job, I don't exactly have a set schedule for every week. Now, if I'm going to Bristol, where our head office is based,
Yeah.
I don't want to have to put that in my work calendar and my home calendar. So I've got a flow that syncs a particular
Wow.
category in my work
That's
Outlook
amazing.
that will then copy it over to my personal calendar. So
Yeah.
little things like that. And, how can I just make my own end user experience better? And then how can I
Yes.
improve that for my department? And then
And make life
ultimately
easier.
the organization. Exactly. All of those things you have to do on the computer again, over and over
Yeah.
again. If you can repeat it, then you can probably
Yeah.
use the Power Platform to make it more efficient.
Yeah. And there's also one thing I noticed, like if you're not working with these tools consistently, maybe let me say, for instance, you worked with Power Platform, like Power Apps or Power Automate this month, and before you work with it again, maybe you are trying to work with it again next year,
Yeah,
maybe a year time period. There's a lot of things you are going to forget.
exactly. I mean,
So
if you think,
consistency,
yeah, we have 2 release waves a year. We
yeah,
have the Power Apps monthly product updates as well, and
yeah,
I'm convinced they're more than monthly, and they just sneak things in every now and again. But yeah, there's an element of you kind of understand the concept and the fundamental structure of the product, and then you
yeah,
have to apply what's changed since then. Just try and keep it fresh, really. But yeah, that's one of the reasons for my blog, because I try to blog about the things that I know I'm not going to do frequently so that I can go back to myself and
Yes, thank you. That's what I actually do, right?
yeah,
Like I write blog posts, especially when I had a challenge when building something. I get to write a blog and I go back
yes,
to
yeah,
when I'm actually maybe next time or another time I'm trying to build that, so maybe something like that or a
yeah,
different
yeah.
solution that has that same particular challenge. I can easily just go back and okay, what did I do here? What did I do here?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's really funny because, like, if you look at my blog, you'll get
Yeah.
the opposite perception of what I do day to day. So a
Yeah.
lot of my blog posts in the last few months have been about Canvas apps. So you would assume that I'm building Canvas apps all the time,
Yes.
and the reality is that I spend more time building model-driven apps. But
Yeah.
I need those reminders there for Canvas apps because I know
Yeah.
I'm probably not going to touch one for another couple of months, and I'll probably have the
Yeah.
same challenge again. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's great. And with even doing that, with that writing of that blog, you're also helping other people in the
Mm,
community. In case if they have the same challenge, they can be able to resolve that issue easily with your blog posts.
exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
the amount of information and
Yeah.
troubleshooting I've had from the community, I could never match that myself, like giving back to the community. So I have to at very least put something out there every now and
Yeah.
again, almost to help other people as well.
Yeah.
So like I said at the beginning, I've learned through the community,
Yes.
and I probably wouldn't be where I am now without having access to the knowledge in the community. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a really useful tool and
Yeah.
great people.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, they're amazing. And you're
Yeah.
amazing too.
Likewise, yeah, we wouldn't be talking here if we didn't have the community, would we?
Yeah, we wouldn't. Yeah,
So
so
no,
it's great. Yeah.
yeah, indeed.
Yeah. So thank you very much, everyone. If you have any questions, you can reach out to Aaron. I'm pronouncing it very well, right?
Yep, Aaron Gums. Don't worry, I've
Aaron
heard
Gums.
many pronunciations of my name in the
Okay.
past.
Yeah. So you can reach out to Aaron Gums on LinkedIn or on Twitter, and you can ask him his question. You can ask him your questions, or you can reach out to me to ask your questions. So thank you very much, and don't forget to subscribe. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.